Legal proceedings may bar Donald Trump from running in several states. The radical supporters are throwing around the term civil war a lot. In the end, only Russia and China would benefit from another civil war in America, even if it's just on a smaller scale. So you have to watch out for their covert assets radicalizing people further and spreading lies and distortions. Russia's intelligence services never found real evidence for a grand manipulation of the 2020 presidential elections. If they had found such evidence, they would have given it to various middlemen to publish. And because these races are so close, special attention has to be paid everywhere, of course. Enough small-scale fraud can make a large difference, but you have to investigate properly and accept reality when it does not conform to your wishes. Now, pro-Russian right-wingers in the US were the most hardcore when it came to wild claims about voting fraud. Evidence didn't matter anymore, just perception. If Americans are fighting each other, Russia benefits. On my weekly show with Jeff Nyquist, we talked about the scissor strategy of Russia. They use extreme left and right-wing plus conspiracy influencer assets to cause a spiral of radicalization. Now, obviously, the old civil war in America gets distorted a lot. From the simplistic leftist perspective, the South was a fascist hellhole, while the good North was on the glorious path to left progress, and invading the South was a sort of anti-fascist rescue operation. From the extreme right-winger and truther perspective today, the North was controlled by Illuminati Jews and other bad people, and the invasion marked a turning point in America, where everything started to go downhill up to today, where the conspiracy has grown massively. So you go from this golden era age, of George Washington and the next couple of presidents, and you just move on into this grand decay. Now, all of this could have a devastating impact on the situation in the coming years. So how people perceive the past and the distant past. This is incredibly important because propaganda works that way. You distort, you lie, you create this gigantic carpet. And it may take years, sometimes even decades. But then when a big operation is launched, the attacking force or let's say the Russians, for example, they can use that carpet of propaganda to sell a certain narrative about a new event. So if there is a military confrontation with China and North Korea, Iran, etc., and a new conscription under a Democrat in the White House, if that happens, right-wing U.S. patriots could refuse military service because they fear being fed into a meat grinder on purpose. Would the federal government then prosecute these patriots? Would patriots from all over the country move to conservative states and form militias that would defend themselves against the federal government, if necessary? In such events, different narratives would be used by the relevant different types of media to influence citizens. Now, traditional conspiracy influencers will tell you that the Rothschilds controlled the British Empire at the time and could start wars at will with their money. The heroic US President Andrew Jackson had defeated the Jewish bankers, according to that narrative, and defeated the second US central bank. And then these satanic Jews were seeking revenge in the traditional way by starting a war. In the north of America, the Rothschild agents supposedly stirred up sentiment against slavery. In the south, the malicious agents had close ties to the rich cotton producers. The goal was to kill Americans and then regain control of the banking industry. In reality, the tiny Rothschild banking family was recruited by old aristocratic intelligence networks. First on German soil, then handed over to the related British Crown to perform tasks. Smuggle money to Wellington's troops, buy bonds and sell bonds according to the orders to stabilize the fractional banking system which the aristocratic overlords had set up in Britain. The Rothschilds were just assets. there existed old aristocratic intelligence networks, and they were really, really large. So check out my ebook on that. You find the link in the description below. Some of these spy rings survived the American Revolution and grew further. King George III of Britain, for example, was just one man of a gargantuan family cluster that goes back to the year 800. Of course, Freemasonry of the American South played an important role, but Masonry is not Jewish, as the conspiracy influencers claim. It came out of Scotland and was then reconstituted in 1717 by King George I. The ritual elements concerning the Old Testament are simply a gateway into the ancient world, and Masonry is fascinated with the large empires of that era, such as Rome, Greece, Egypt, and so on. Masonry is used as a vehicle. It can be used for many things, and one of which is covert operations, but any vehicle will do. Now, this is how espionage works. You can use pretty much everything. Secret societies get the most attention because they sort of have this tradecraft built into them to a degree. So, for example, the Knights of the Golden Circle got significant attention, but you could call a network anything. You know, it doesn't have to sound so prestigious or mysterious. You know, oftentimes networks and front organizations are created to appear as boring as possible. You know, an import-export trading company or whatever. You know, anything will do. The Secretary of War for the Southern Confederacy was a Jew named Judah P. Benjamin, who allegedly sabotaged the conduct of the war and who, after the defeat, fled with a pile of gold to the Rothschilds in England. Har, har, har. The Rothschilds, it is said, through their agent August Belmont, had control over the most important New York banks in order to finance the war in the North. So people tell a distorted history of events and are completely unaware of older aristocratic intelligence networks. Judah Philip Benjamin had actually fled to England and worked there as a lawyer and even became a Queen's Counsel. As a child, he was already considered highly intelligent, was given appropriate support, and was allowed to attend the elite Yale University in the United States in 1825 at the age of just 14. Now, Yale, of course, goes back to these very old and aristocratic intelligence networks. Eli Evans, Benjamin's most astute biographer, noted, Benjamin served President Davis and the Confederacy as a kind of court Jew, just as his Sephardic ancestors had served the kings of Europe for centuries. Now, this was a very common thing in Europe. You know, the aristocracy would recruit people, sometimes Jewish people, because they were just, regarded as useful in some ways. And so this was kind of the hierarchy. You know, the aristocracy ran things. They were very, very experienced, especially on intelligence matters. And of course, the control over these assets was always maintained. Judah abruptly abandoned his studies and studied law elsewhere and became a lawyer. Civil War historian William C. Davis acknowledged that there's strong evidence that Judah was a homosexual. For an ordinary citizen, the circumstance presented a huge risk. Secret services repeatedly recruited homosexuals because they could be kept under control, with a mixture of protection and the potential for blackmail. In the South, you had to be a Freemason in higher circles, but there is nothing confirmed about Judah Benjamin's membership. There's the fairy tale of the Palladian Freemasonry rite, which goes back to the fraud Leo Taxil. Secret alliance was supposedly formed between Scottish Masonry and Jewish Masonic overlords. Of course, this is false, and Judah became increasingly wealthy and successful, rising to the rank of a senator and ultimately Secretary of War for the southern states. The task was difficult because the South had no significant arms industry of its own and no powerful navy to keep the ports free for supplies from abroad. The plan was to wait for the invasion from the north, lure the enemy into the endlessly deep spaces, and slow them down until the north was ready for a negotiated solution. Benjamin had no military experience and experienced heavy defeats. A quarter of a century after the war, it was revealed that Benjamin and Davis had agreed that Benjamin would act as a scapegoat rather than expose the lack of weapons. Britain showed little support for the South. Emperor Napoleon III of France also hesitated. The bank Erlanger EC wanted to step in with loans. The banking boss Baron Frederick Emil Derlanger traveled to Richmond in 1863 and negotiated with Benjamin. The Baron had visited the Stockholm royal court and was involved in successful Swedish and Portuguese state refinancing. The Portuguese royal family, with King Ferdinand II of Saxon-Coburg and Gotha, the line from which the British throne later came from, appointed Frederick Emil and his father Raphael hereditary Portuguese barons out of gratitude. In 1860, Raphael was raised to the hereditary status of baron by the Duke of Sachsen-Meiningen from the Welfen cluster. He began his career with the Rothschilds in Frankfurt, which in turn had been originally had been recruited by the Hessen-Kassel noble line. Frederick married the daughter of Judah Benjamin's confidant, John Slidell, the southern ambassador to the court of Emperor Napoleon. So this is just some of the background. Now, of course, there were many more people involved, and this all seems very chaotic, and this was also intentional. So you were never supposed to know who was playing for what side and who had what agenda. So it's a very, very complicated mess. So you can't just interpret this in categories of left and right, or the Jews did it and all that stuff. Officially, Britain at the time of the Civil War had no real foreign intelligence service. Nobody supposedly had, but these services existed. If you were recruited, you had no idea how big it was, where the centers were, and so on. Benjamin oversaw the Confederate Secret Service, which was responsible for covert operations in the North, and funded former Interior Secretary Jacob Thompson to perform covert operations that could politically undermine Lincoln. Why was a lawyer like Benjamin made a secret intelligence supervisor? It's suggestive that he had some experience with intelligence before, some training. Thompson is said to have met John Wilkes Booth, the northern assassin of U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. In April of 1865, most of the intelligence service's official papers of the South were burned by Confederate Secretary of State Judah Benjamin just before the Confederate government evacuated Richmond, although a few pages of a financial ledger remain, so a lot of it is still secret. So the full story of Confederate Secret Service operations may never be known, especially when it relates to these older networks came out of Britain and the aristocracy. Using various camouflages, Benjamin fled via Florida and the Bahamas to England, where he was allowed to become a high-ranking lawyer. In 1861, Salomon de Rothschild considered Benjamin the greatest mind in North America and Abraham Lincoln an extremist. Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, also tried to escape, ended up in captivity, but was released a few years later. Many people at the time and historians since then emphasize his many bad decisions and his undiplomatic behavior. Unlike Benjamin, he had military training and a career before the Civil War. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln was considered a fanatical workhorse who oversaw all aspects of the war and wanted to control everything. The theater actor John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln on April 14th, 1865. Booth and his co-conspirators had actually planned to assassinate other important Northern officials as well. They were caught and killed. Conspiracy literature once again obscured the events and claimed that Lincoln fought against the Jewish banker conspiracy and was therefore killed by the same conspiracy. A widely used Lincoln quote that is thrown around in conspiracy media, the quote was never found in the Times of London archives. And according to the fake legend, the Rothschilds wanted to impose crazy interest rates on Lincoln. But Lincoln was actually a proponent of a central bank, and his supposedly interest-free greenback dollars were anything but interest-free. Booth was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. And furthermore, in various books, there are mentions of the influential Italians, Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi. So supposedly they were involved in this grand Illuminati Jew conspiracy, but these two had actually conquered or united Italy on behalf of some aristocratic family clusters, and they were supplied with American weapons. There's a bust of Lincoln, to the honor of Lincoln in San Marino. You can actually visit that place. In conspiracy literature, the two Italians are considered agents of the Great Jewish Conspiracy. Garibaldi was offered a major general's commission in the US Army, but did not take up the post. The Southern General Albert Pike was a leading figure in the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, but he was not a leader of the Palladian Rite. Not a leader of the Palladian Rite along with Mazzini, and there's all kinds of fake quotes from him about the supposed Luciferian doctrine of the Scottish Rite and that sort of stuff. So it's about time people start, just ignoring the fake stuff and just not argue with the fake stuff. The Rothschilds, according to legend, the Rothschilds supposedly wanted to force loans on Lincoln at 35% interest and then get permission to create America's new central bank. Having rejected a series of loan offers from New York, Lincoln launched the greenback. But this was an ordinary paper fiat currency not backed by precious metal. He brought in Salmon P. Chase to finance the war with the usual mix of paper money, loans, and taxes. This is just the normal way. The Rothschilds allegedly had control over British troops in Canada, as well as French and Spanish troops in Mexico, in order to intervene in the US Civil War. This is the old fairy tale that the Rothschilds could provoke military action at will. Even though this family was super tiny and everybody knew where they lived and their women lived and children lived, so never any assassinations, nothing, nobody ever took them out. It's just a ridiculous fairy tale. So these fairy tales, they were constantly expanded. So it is said that the Russian Tsar Alexander II, he thwarted the Rothschilds' plans by sending his fleet to America for protection. The Tsar was supposedly the only ruler in Eurasia who was not in debt to the Rothschilds and also did not want to accept a central bank controlled by the Rothschilds. Of course, the conspiracy authors interpreted the communist revolution in Russia a few decades later as an act of revenge by the satanic Rothschilds. The Tsar came from the same noble line as the British throne, who in turn had set up the Rothschild Bank as a front organization. So none of the popular conspiracy authors seriously examine the aristocratic secret intelligence agencies. Nobody's asking why Rothschilds were never assassinated, something of that nature. In September of 1863, a Russian fleet of just 6 warships sailed to the east coast of North America and stayed there for 7 months. They patrolled the surrounding, based in New York, they patrolled the surrounding area on behalf of Lincoln's Union. Something similar happened on the West Coast, where a fleet of 6 warships was stationed in San Francisco. Not completely insignificant, but also not a major intervention in the conflict. So, once you understand the old intelligence networks, you realize the aristocrats tried everything under the sun to gain control of the U.S. The real full history of the U.S. Civil War is still secret, so you should refrain from simplistic left and right interpretations. At the same time as the Civil War, aristocratic intelligence was also heavily involved in Europe to infiltrate the new left-wing movements. Also, important elements of communist history are still secret. So check out my book on old intelligence networks in Enlightenment and Communism. You can find the link in the description below. Also, please subscribe to this channel, like the video, comment, and share.